You are listening to the Enormocast.
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
big
big
house.
place,
We sold
that
it
side
out.
of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000
I'll say.
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is December 21st. The solstice is upon us, the longest, shortest day of the year. Feels long. It's actually short. Anyway, it's about 10 o'clock here in Carbondale, Colorado, the nighttime. But guess what? Tomorrow we start going towards the light once again. Yes, you know this is a big problem for me, the darkness. But I'm soldiering through. So here we are with episode 142 of the Enormocast, a conversation with big wall legend, Mr. John Middendorf. But before we get to that, guess what? I missed the Enormocast's birthday. That's right. The very first Enormocast was posted on December 9th, 2011, which was 6 years ago at this point. So, happy birthday to the Enormocast. Here we are, 6 years in. Can't believe it myself.
Just for you on your birthday, we love you very much, so have a funky birthday. Please have it funky birthday. Baby, have a funky birthday. Sing with me this funky birthday. Celebrate your funky birthday. Sing along this funky birthday. Won't you have it funky birthday? In a cosmic way, your funky birthday.
And speaking of the funk, I'm really looking forward to 2018. I think I'm going to bring some of the funk back to the Enormocast. It's gotten a little too slick, a little bit too, tried and true. So we're going to bring some funk back, starting with the next episode. I got a pretty funky one for you. Okay, a small bit of business to take care of. First of all, took the commercials off the start of the show just as a nod to letting consumerism mellow out a little bit here at Christmas time. You guys have bought everything you need, probably. We're all good to go till 2018. I do want to give a shout out to Rocksteady Bodyworks and Jessa over there. Rocksteady Bodyworks actually let me use their space for this interview. It's in downtown Salt Lake City, across from the State Theater above the Bayou, and it's a premier massage practice for active climbers, skiers, runners, mountain bikers. Jessa is a backcountry rider, mountain biker, and she understands what you need. And got a couple friends actually that go there, a couple climbers that get deep tissue massage, joint mobilization, all the stuff you need to keep crushing. Shout out to them, rocksteadybodyworks.com in Salt Lake City. If you need that sort of work done in Salt Lake, please check them out. They were very generous to let me use their space. Okay, let's talk about John Middendorf, legendary wall climber, the founder and brains behind A5 Adventures, his company that produced the legendary A5 porta-ledge, as well as a bunch of other gear like the bird beaks. And when John created those designs for porta-ledges, he certainly changed the game quite literally for wall climbing, because the porta-ledges that he was building could go up in just about any conditions, and people could stay up on a wall for as long as they had supplies, weather out storms. It just changed the game, not only in Yosemite, but more importantly in the Great Ranges, the Baffin Islands, the Patagonia. Going up into stormy conditions and being able to survive made all the difference for what became 10-day and 2-week, and even I think we talk about a wall in Baffin that took 40-some days in the porta-ledge. So pretty rad and pretty cool stuff. Now, I think he had moved on a little bit when I showed up in the valley, but his influence was certainly there, even though I was running a fish ledge for most of my climbs. Hey, Russ, Fish Products, come on the show. If you're listening, get in touch. Would love to talk to you. Back to John. It was really cool to sit down with him because, again, he was sort of a hero of mine and influenced what I was doing on walls, certainly, just like he influenced everybody. And also, he's in Tasmania these days, so I had to stalk him online and figure out that he was here and kind of reached out to him, but he got right back and was excited to do the show. The reason he was here is because he's back in the design game, producing the D4 porta-ledge, which we talk a lot about, a new porta-ledge design, lighter, stronger, more badass, and they're producing small batches of those, the D4 porta-ledge, which we talk about quite a bit in the show. So go check that out and check this out, conversation with John Middendorf.
How did you end up in Tasmania?
Well, about 15 years ago, I actually went to school to study my engineering because actually I was looking for a way to update my engineering skills. When I studied engineering, it was all basically, calculators. And so, of course, there's a lot of new computer tools for engineering. And so I really needed to learn those skills. And I looked at American universities, quite expensive. Over in Australia, it was quite affordable, actually, to get a master's in engineering. So I went over there to Sydney, University of New South Wales, and did the first half of my master's. And while I was there, I realized Australia was a great opportunity. And so I applied for my permanent residency and got sponsored by the state of Tasmania, actually. And eventually I got that. But in the meantime, I came back to America, and I was working as a river guide at the time. This was after I sold my business, and I was working in the Grand Canyon for CanX. And I met my wife, Jenny. And over the next few years, I talked her into trying out Australia. And but we've been there now for 10 years, and we love it. It's a great place to raise our 2 kids. We have a little girl, Remy, and my boy, Rowan. And it's just a wonderful environment, really, because it's I guess it's sort of like how America might have been 25 years ago. Just things are a little bit less hectic and more peaceful, I would say.
And isn't Tasmania even maybe a little bit slower or behind,
exactly.
than Sydney, Melbourne, and that kind of place, and that kind of thing too?
Yeah,
it's a little countrified, right?
Well, I mean, most of the mainland Australians think of, and no offense to West Virginians, but they consider Tasmania sort of the backwoods of Australia.
Sure.
But in reality, it's quite a modern city, and
you're in Hobart.
Hobart, yeah. We're just outside of Hobart, but we have the new Mona Museum of Old and New Art, and so there's a bit of culture there.
Right.
It's got all the resources of a city. It's nice.
It's pretty cool. I mean, so they sponsored you because of the engineering, was your education something that...
Exactly, yeah.
They said, yeah, we want...
Yeah, it's quite difficult, I think, especially for an American to immigrate to Australia. But because engineering is a skill they look for, but actually if you're a hairdresser, you would get more points for the immigration. And so I needed a few extra points. And most people...
So you took up hairdressing for a little while?
I thought about it, but because I really liked Australia. But basically, most people will move to Sydney, and so the other states are competing a little bit for the immigrants, and so they gave that extra few points that put me over the point limit for the immigration.
Right.
And I was able to get my permanent residency.
So let's go back a little bit further to your climbing career before that. How old are you?
I'm 57 now.
Okay. And you don't look 57.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes, Australia keeps you young. So tell me a little bit about your origins with climbing.
Okay.
Because to kind of frame my experience with you, and I think a lot of people who know your name associated with big wall climbing, for sure, with A5, the company that then became a part of North Face for a while. In that era, you were just saying to me the late 80s, early 90s was kind of your big wall heyday. In 92, the Trango Tower, and we'll get to that sort of stuff. So go back a little bit further than that to who you were as a kid and how you got into climbing to begin with.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think as a kid, I was really terrible at all the team sports that we were expected to do as kids, and I actually got into single sculling.
Okay.
And
where were you? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the East Coast.
Okay.
This was in Washington D.C. area, and so I was really interested in sculling. It was an independent sport, and I loved it, just rowing on the Potomac River there. But when I was 14, my mom, I was actually starting to get in a bit of trouble too in the summers, long school breaks, and just starting to delve into the things that teenagers can get into. And my mom heard from a friend, her cousin actually, that the Telluride Mountaineering School was a good place to sort of straighten up these kids who were getting into trouble. So I went to this summer program in Telluride, the Telluride Mountaineering School, and Henry Barber was one of my instructors actually. And during this 35-day program, we do all sorts of things, like a lot of 5 or 7 day backpacks, and climbing was a component of that program. And that's when Henry would show up for that week. And I just found climbing was something that I naturally took to. I actually just loved the balance of it and the scrambling around and being outside, and it became my passion, really. Mm-hmm. And then, so I went to that summer program every summer, but other than that, I really didn't do too much climbing until I met a good friend of mine, John Ely, and he was really interested in going to Yosemite and doing these things. And so we borrowed a car when we were 17 years old, and we drove out to Yosemite. And once I saw the walls of Yosemite, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. Just at that point, I was like, well, that's the ultimate, climbing these long, giant faces of rock. And so during that trip, we were there for about 2.5 weeks, and we climbed East Buttress of El Cap, and we climbed Washington Column, mm-hmm. and we climbed Half Dome, and we were quite
nice. That's a pretty good resume for your first trip to Yosemite.
Yeah,
and this is what we're talking about: early '70s, mid '70s.
This was '77.
Okay,
so
right on.
And we were pretty young.
I was 6.
Yeah, but even so, we were pretty young because, of course, the Yosemite was full of the hardcore climbers and Yosemite Rescue Team and all those people that we all are like, whoa, look at those guys. But we just did our own thing and pulled off a wall, and after that, I knew I was bitten by wall climbing. That's really what I was training for, what I was thinking about. Like, how can I... So whenever I was at a crag free climbing, I would always be thinking, like, how this would be if I was, like, 1,000 feet up or 2,000 feet up. And then, of course, I went to high school, and my climbing was sporadic throughout those years. And then I went to Stanford for engineering, mm-hmm. and graduated from that in 1983. And I was pretty much planning to get an engineering job. That was during those Reagan years, and really what I studied at Stanford was solar engineering, windmills, and I was really interested in the alternative energy aspect of engineering. But during those Reagan years, all the jobs were in military.
Okay.
That's what...
For engineers.
For engineers, yeah. And so I had one job offer with Motorola where I was going to design a box for 2 years. It was the box for the F-16 or F-15 computer system. And I was really almost about ready to take that job. But I had a motorcycle at the time, a BMW R60/5, and I did a final little tour around California. And then I was just stopped off to Yosemite one last time to go
before you went to jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Before you went into the cubicle for good.
And I had actually sold all my climbing gear. All my climbing gear, I had sold it, and everything I had was fit in my panniers of my BMW. But I did have some climbing shoes and a chalk bag and a 2-inch Swami belt. And I met Warner Braun in Yosemite. And he started to, let's go climbing, man. And just out of the blue. And I climbed with Warner, and he mentioned that there's a spot on the rescue team opening up. And so the next day I went over to see John Dill in the SAR cache in Yosemite, and I got on the rescue team, and then I lived in Yosemite for the next 4 years, essentially.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And during that time, I basically just was able to really just delve into that wall climbing, and and doing nose in a day, like all the opportunities that those big walls offered, I was really getting into.
Like in the early 80s.
Yeah, early 80s. This would be 84 to 87 or 88 when I lived there full time.
We're talking about, who are the giants the Bird's still around.
Yeah, he would show up.
Still around.
Yeah.
All those guys.
Yeah, Ron Kauk, of course, and Backer. Actually climbed a lot with John Backer during those years, but wall climbing was sort of at a lull at that point, I would say.
Right.
Like it was all about free climbing and not long free climbing, but just like hard routes that were done, traditional, like ground up routes in Tuolumne and Yosemite. That was sort of the main game.
Yeah, like the 80s is like I feel like sometimes it's this like forgotten kind of decade because it feels like there was this transition or, a lot of things were germinating versus happening necessarily.
I feel that too. I feel like it's really been a forgotten era. I think a lot of it is because, the 60s and 70s was historic and there were great photographers who documented some of that. And then, of course, in the late 80s and 90s, video became like a standard way to capture things. But there's I can't remember only a couple people who actually had a camera back in those days.
Right.
We weren't really thinking about presenting this. But I agree. I think the 80s was an era where a lot of the things that have now become like very classic mainstream, like even slacklining and doing routes fast and hard aid and free climbing on walls, all those things we were playing with a lot. I think that era really sort of pushed all those things that today are considered the highest level of climbing. They started in the 80s really, because the 70s I think was like a time of perfected, hard aid, Bridwell doing Sea of Dreams, and also Dale Bard and Kauk and Backer, pushing free climbing and soloing. But the things related to big walls, even just hard free climbing and moving fast on walls, that was all starting around that time.
Well, and also they were figuring out this ethic of losing the yo-yoing and the hang-dogging, which had been this pariah creating method.
Absolutely, yeah.
They had started to figure out that, wow, this could really help us climb these things.
Not at all. But not in the valley. The valley was the holdout, of course. The valley was accused of being a lot of laggards in the climbing community with the Jeff Smoot article of the Valley Syndrome, and he wrote the Valley Syndrome, inferred that the valley was really just a dead place. Nobody was really doing anything. But at the same time, the numbers might not have been the greatest, but there was really, among the group I was with, like Dave Schultz and Scott Cosgrove, and just these people who were just there to climb all the time. The traditional ground up, don't pre-inspect. If you fall, you immediately lower down. It was like a kind of a pure ethic that we all felt very strongly about, I guess, because it was about if you were on a mountain somewhere, you're not going to necessarily have the chance to pre-inspect and do all that. You just needed to have those skills to start at the bottom and get to the top. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of where that traditional ethic was strong in terms of building your skills. So when you were in a situation where you had to do or die, you could do it.
Right.
Rather, so the practicing aspect was frowned upon, I guess. And of course, there was in the mid to late 80s, of course, there was that conflict, between the spokespersons for each side of.
Right.
But that was after I was really there full time. When I was there, it was just everybody was happy with that ethic, and there wasn't any.
The early 80s, yeah. So you were there up
to about 87.
About 87, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And 88 is when it started to go a little bit haywire, with the different ethics clashing in the.
Well, yeah, and then you had Todd and Paul come in and working the Salothe, which
absolutely,
I'm sure didn't make the other side very happy in terms of their ethic up there and working a route as big as that.
People, I think sometimes people, even today, I think people are like, oh yeah, you guys were just really not friendly to these people. But actually, I don't remember that,
Okay.
I remember actually being, I knew Todd, and we hung out and we'd drink in the bar and sometimes, or just hang out at the deli or something. But, I don't really There were a few people, I think, that were antagonistic towards the people who weren't climbing that style, but most of the people were just like, cool, you know. But of course, you know, we always felt like Mark Hudon and Max Jones's effort on the South A was like the real pure way, you know, because they kind of just went up and did it in that traditional style, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, and always wanted. I've been dying to get those guys on together.
Oh yeah,
but it hasn't happened. I've hung out with both of them separately, and one of these days I'm just gonna have to like buy them plane tickets and get them in the same room, because that era too. And what happened with those guys, and I think it was 79, 78, 79.
Yeah, they wrote that article, state of the art, part of the States.
And they just ground up, tried to do the South A, and you know, to where it was a few meters of it in a few different places that they did free.
Yeah, probably 100 feet or so,
yeah.
I'd say.
But yeah, I mean, an incredible effort, way ahead of its time.
Exactly,
you know, in the ethic you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely, once again, you know, shout out to those guys and try to get them on the show one of these days. But so let's talk a little bit about well, actually, I have a question going back a little ways to what we were talking about. So you're an engineer now. You went to Stanford. You've got this brain for engineering. We joked about how you were just talking earlier about how you ended up taking care of your kids kind of on your own because your wife was in bed after surgery, and you realized you could like clean up some of the systems in the house even. So like you've got this brain that deals with things engineering wise. You found this climbing thing. What was it in your personality that almost made you like stick to the path of the job building the box in the lab at wherever? I don't know who built the F-15.
Well, it was really just financial, really,
right,
you know, because actually my folks supported me through college. But when I went to the Valley, they basically said, "Okay, you know, you're done with college. We've supported you enough," and so, you know, getting the job was really just a way to make a living.
Okay.
But I was able to find a living in Yosemite. You know, we worked on rescues. We probably made $3,000 or $4,000 a year on rescues, and then we'd actually get film jobs, and so it was a comfortable living. A lot of times I would be, you know, rice would be the only thing for dinner, but yeah, I mean, the only thing that attracted me to building a box for an F-16 for 2 years was really the you know, making a living, really, I guess. But otherwise, I found the dirtbag lifestyle and just delved into that full time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's got to be one of those. I mean, you were able to explain it precisely enough that I feel like you have to think about it these days as like a really pivotal moment in your life.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, it was. I felt like I was letting my parents down, you know, because I
understand, yeah,
and they actually were very critical of being, you know, having this dirtbag lifestyle. Now, in the '90s, when climbing became like mainstream, my dad was like, "Why aren't you still doing that? You know, you could still be, you know, you could be making a living doing that." But you know, at the time, they just considered it. I was just living in the dirt. You know, they didn't really understand climbing.
For sure, from the East Coast too. Like,
it's like you call your mom up. Yeah, Mom, I just did nose in a day, and you know, 10 hours 45. It's a new record, and oh, that's nice, dear.
Yeah, totally.
No concept of what we're doing out there.
You live in a tent still? Okay, well, call me back.
That was kind of fun. The first year, I actually had this old JanSport tent that was quite worn out. And the first winter I lived in Yosemite, we were in the rescue site, and it snowed quite a bit, and there was a constant puddle in my tent, an icy puddle, and I slept in a puddle for all winter long in that first winter in Yosemite. But you know, for me, it was all about now I was training. You know, this was my training.
Right. I was going to say, couldn't you have engineered your way out of that puddle?
Well, I kind of saw an opportunity to like increase my suffering, so I was going to be more prepared for the things to come.
How'd that work out?
It was great. Yeah, I think I mastered suffering.
You think
for a
back
while.
to the puddle, and you're like, this is no big deal.
I can't do it now, but
understood. So the engineering thing is an interesting part of this. Sort of picking your brain. So obviously at some point in the 80s, in this time, when you're on SAR and you're doing these big walls, how is it that you start thinking about gear, what needs to be done in manufacturing your own gear? Because eventually, you know, you come into starting this company called A5.
Yeah.
And I believe you said you started at 86 or 87?
Yeah, 86 really.
Okay. So talk about like, again, you're using this brain and looking around and maybe seeing deficiencies in gear and what you guys need. And
well, I consider climbing like three facets of climbing. There's skill, there's technique, and there's equipment. And when I say technique, I mean the technique of using the equipment. So skill would just be, I mean, the purest example of skill, of course, is Alex's latest solo. I mean, that's just like, he's just used so much skill. Now, to get there, he used equipment and he used technique, but he proved that just pure skill can do it. Climb the most iconic wall in the world.
Right, the equipment being his shoes,
yeah,
essentially.
Yeah.
Which are still an important piece of equipment.
Yeah, and maybe he'll climb barefoot someday or somebody. But I would say, so the first step for me was actually, the only text on, as I say, in the early 80s, wall climbing was out of style. There was a few aficionados who loved it. And Corbett was like the top dog. He had climbed 30 El Cap routes, which was a huge amount back then. And but there's like Rich Albushcat. We were oddballs. The ones who really wanted to go back up on these aid walls that had all been done in the 60s and 70s and doing new routes and all that. But the only text on wall climbing back then was advanced rockcraft. Really, that was the only information that you had on like learning how to wall climb.
And that must have been like circa 70?
68 or something.
All right, okay, yeah.
So
we're a little
totally
bit behind
outdated.
the times.
Yeah. And so the first thing I actually...
A lot of prussics in that book.
Yeah. Well, there was a picture of a Jumar, that they just come from the Swiss birding community and were being used for wall climbing. That was a big innovation. But so the first thing I got my mind around was just how to document really all these techniques that wall climbers were using. And I invented a few new ones, like how to lower out from a sling. Maybe it wasn't my invention, but it sort of documented it. And so there was all these techniques that were enabling wall climbs to go faster and more efficiently. Basically, how you haul, you can haul with a tagline and haul two loads, and how you arrange your two haul bags, for example. So all these techniques. So that's the first thing really that sort of captured my engineering brain, if that's what you're asking. Yeah, because I was really like, how do you transfer this sort of experience and knowledge, collective knowledge? It's all. I mean, there's Walt Shipley, who's really quite a good engineer, and so we're just trying to think about how we could explain these techniques. And so I wrote this couple articles for climbing, like issue 99 and 100 on how to wall climb, and that turned into what's called the Big Wall Tech Manual. And that sort of was the first modern, at the time, modern way of how wall climbing was done. So that was like quite an engineering process, I think, just to break it all down between gear and techniques and how you can use these tools to efficiently climb big walls. But again, so that was the era where wall climbing was out of fashion. There was no tools being produced. So, Chenard, of course, it was Chenard back then, they used to produce the best wall climbing hammer, the Chenard hammer, but they weren't making that anymore. And so there's really no hammer available for wall climbing. And of course, to do a hard nailing route, you need to have a good hammer. And so my first product was the big A5 big wall hammer. And I got that forged at Ajax Forge. It's the same place where I found out later that Chenard was using for his hammers, 20 years before. And so I made this new hammer. And A5 started actually as a retail business, just supplying these hard-to-find items like drilling equipment and like a little hand drill that you could bolt onto the bumper of your car and sharpen your drills. And so I just found all these various gloves for wall climbing, and we'd modify a few items to make it. So just really creating a supply for wall climbers of things that were very hard to find. And then... But after about a year of that, I realized, there's new tools that could help. And of course, I'd been rescued off Half Dome in 1986. And the reason we got in such trouble up there on the south face of Half Dome was because the porta-ledges of the day were made of the flies were made of light ripstop nylon, and the frames were 1-inch tubing. They didn't really have solid corner joints. And in this storm, we got hit by massive storm. It was one of Yosemite's worst recorded storms, actually.
Who's up there with you?
Mike Corbett, and Steve Bosky.
Okay.
So we started out in nice weather, and predicted nice weather, but then the storm came in, and in that little Yosemite Valley, of course, you have a Venturi effect. So the storm came in, and it was just howling winds, and because the wall is slightly less than vertical, all the rain just turned into basically a 1 foot thick waterfall. And it basically just came right through the flies of the porta-ledges, and we got completely soaked as if we had just jumped into the river. Then the first night, the temperatures dropped below freezing, so everything turned into solid ice. Our ropes were blocks of ice that we couldn't rappel with. So we were trapped. And the second day and night, the porta-ledges fell apart. And so, of course, this planted a seed of designing the better porta-ledge.
I mean, that's really you're like, these porta-ledges suck.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I live through this, I'm going to build a porta-ledge that works. Yeah. Is that basically what's going on?
Well, I think it took me a little while to realize, because at the time, it was all considered state of the art. This is the most modern gear, but yeah, I think after I built the hammer, I was like, well, now it's time to really start building a better porta-ledge.
So what did you guys have to get high-lined off and the whole?
Yeah. We it's quite a.
Is that what it's called, Highline?
Well, the helicopter from the Lemoore Naval Base came in.
Okay.
And it turns out, the technology, if we had been on that wall a couple of years before, the technology wasn't there for that helicopter to come
you out of there,
hover so close in those winds, because it was still, we got rescued in a lull between two major storms. And it was quite windy, but they just developed a new gyro system for helicopters. The Navy had, and this enabled the helicopter to hover close, solidly enough to lower a guy, and they throw a horse collar under your armpits and just pluck you off the wall.
Zip you off.
Yeah, one at a time, and of course, when the helicopter came, the wall was solid ice, for 1,000 feet above us. 4 or 5 inches of solid ice. And when the helicopter came, the helicopter caused these massive avalanches to smash down on us, and we had lots of softball-sized chunks of ice just smashing us. Felt like you're in a batting cage with pro batters whacking.
So totally lucky to be alive.
Yeah,
it was that close.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if they hadn't been able to pull us off, there's no way we would have survived the next storm that came in that night.
Situation, 3 frozen bodies strapped to the wall.
And the rescue was amazing. There was 30 people from Camp 4 who were trying to hike up to the top of Half Dome, but that's
covered in ice.
It's completely inaccessible. So they were stopped at they couldn't get past the cables up there.
Wow.
But it was a major effort, and we were so grateful.
Right.
Yeah.
So you come down, and now it's time to this germ in your brain of the gear. So continue with that.
Yeah, so actually, that sort of, at the time, I was very confident of my skills, but that being rescued on Half Dome really set me back, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And I almost lost a bit of enthusiasm for wall climbing. I did. Actually, I didn't do another wall until 1989.
Okay.
And so that's when I went to Flagstaff, Arizona, and started the retail A5, and then started developing the new porta-ledge. With Kyle Copeland, he came into the business, and he had a lot of sewing skills, and so I engineered the frame, and he engineered the fabric bits, and we basically made, our first generations were stronger and had a heavier duty fly material, but that whole process basically took about 10 years, I'd say. The first ones were good; they were much better than what was there before, but it wasn't until about 1991, I would say, we produced the first truly stormproof porta-ledge.
Right.
That could withstand any conditions you're going to find any wall in the world. And so the A5 was definitely, becoming a tool. The A5 porta-ledge was definitely becoming a tool that you could now survive any kind of storm.
Right.
And I felt that was really accomplished when I climbed a wall. We climbed Tribal Right, Steve Quinlan and I, in 1991. And we started up in bad weather.
And that's over on the right side?
Yes,
right?
Just to the right of the nose.
Oh, no. Oh, it's right in there.
Yeah, we started up.
Oh, that's right, okay.
Yeah, we started up actually the right side of El Cap Tower, and then we continued on Tribal Right. We started up in bad weather because we both had limited time frames, and every day we got hit by a pretty good storm. Nobody else was on El Cap that whole week. But this porta-ledge we had was we were able to survive. And that's when I knew, like, okay, now this can be taken anywhere in the world and you could survive.
Right.
Because at that time, most of the big walls that had been being done in remote places were done with fixed ropes.
Okay.
Like most of the routes, all the, what you would call a real true wall route in Patagonia, for example, were all done with fixed ropes up to, in the 70s and 80s. And
what about that Willens thing?
The Willens box.
Yeah, the Willens box.
Yeah, that was more of a base camp tool, really, because they only used that weighed about 100 pounds, I think,
right.
And they only used that for like, I think they did haul it up a bit, but yeah, it wasn't a portable item, and it took quite a long time to set up, I think. And Lowe, of course, had experimented with the porta-ledge. Low equipment, but they were never commercially for sale, for example, so there was tantalizing bits of like technology that would enable survival on these big routes, but there was nothing really available until the SAE-5, I would say, and that actually resulted in a huge boom, I would say, through the 90s in standards in remote big walls, because now for the first time, like, all these routes were being done in what we call a big wall alpine style, where you leave the ground and it's a much more committing style, of course, because with fixed ropes, you can always go back to base camp. But once you get up 4 or 5 pitches without fixed ropes to the ground, you're really committed. Sure. As you know, it's quite an involved process to get back to the ground. So the big wall alpine style, where you leave the ground and don't go back, is a much more committing style, but it's a more aesthetic style, I would say, of big walls. You can actually do walls more efficiently, in a way. You're not spending months, fixing ropes and coming down, and there was a big boom in standards, I'd say, in the 90s. Of course, in the Great Trango and in the north face of Trango Tower, and Escudo in Patagonia. These were all like pioneering routes where people were climbing in big wall alpine style without fixed ropes, and it was it was new in that sense.
So the 90s, 91. When did you say you thought your ledge was like ready to?
Yeah, I would say after we did Tribal Right.
Yeah. And what year was that?
That was 1991.
Yeah. So, and then that's actually about the era that I started aid climbing in Colorado, and my reasoning had more to do with this reverence for the past. The way I've joked about, how everybody was wearing Lycra, and we were like trying to find wool knickers in thrift stores and stuff. But anyway, but it also is, you wonder how you got influenced to do one thing or another, and so definitely. There's this feeling that there was a resurgence of wall climbing in the early 90s. How much of it was organic, and what do you think about like this opportunity with these ledges? Because I remember there's two guys. There was you, A5, and there was Fish.
Yeah.
And making the ballistic haul bags, making the proper ledges that could survive storms, probably playing off each other's designs as it goes, but there was enough wall climbing to go on to sustain, at least on a small level, these two companies that were making big wall gear. So do you think it was already like moving there, or the gear brought it there? Just the feeling of the kind of, again, this nexus of these moments.
Exactly. Well, I wrote this article for Ascent with Steve Roper and in the 90s, and the premise of the article is that innovation precedes jumps in human standards.
Right.
So I go back to 1492 when they were sieging Mount Aguil in Europe, and they were just purely showing their technical prowess of being able to siege a castle, and then it goes throughout the 1800s and 1900s, and what you see is that throughout history, all these achievements in climbing were always preceded by a jump in the technology. So when you look at the Eiger, for example, the Eiger had been been attempted many times in the 30s, but it wasn't until the front point crampons made by Greville that it really became more possible, I guess you could say. So and then, of course, friends, for example, they came in and people were resisting them at first, but of course they've resulted in a huge jump in standards. And so I consider the porta-ledge part of that too. Having a porta-ledge that for the first time you can survive any kind of conditions, enabled a lot of climbers to fulfill these dreams that they might have had, but now they have the tool to actually do it. So I would say that the confidence that you would have in having a porta-ledge that you could survive and spend 3 or 4 nights in a big storm enabled like a lot of climbers to just push standards, really.
Right. And do get up there for forever.
Yeah.
I mean,
they can survive now.
What was the Mark Sinnott, the Great and Secret Show?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, what was that, like 30 some days, 40 days or something like that?
Yeah.
In their porta-ledge?
Yeah, 4,200-foot wall
in Baffin Island. Yeah. So, I mean, that's directly related.
Exactly.
In a severe environment like that.
Well, Baffin is actually fairly good weather.
Right.
I've been up there a few trips, and it's cold, and because the storms move in a bit slow, and then it's snowing. You're not getting wet.
Right.
And so actually Baffin is fairly gentle if you can handle cold. Patagonia, on the other hand, those winds drive you crazy. You can't survive. Human psyche can't survive in high winds for days and days. So
flapping ripstop.
Yeah.
Like it'll eventually push you over the edge.
Exactly. And then, of course, in the Karakoram, you have serious conditions, that are just crazy storms. So
let's go back to that. You just threw it out there quickly a moment ago, the Great Triangle Tower in 1992 with Xavier Bongard.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Well, it's Xavier Bongard. Yes.
Yeah,
Xavier.
So
Xaver. People sometimes put an I in there, but it's just the...
So, you got, 91, you said you did travel right in a storm.
Yeah.
And was sort of a proving ground. Was that like... a conscious, hey, why don't we go and really put this stuff to the test, or did it just happen to be, a next step?
Oh no, it was really fortunate series of events for me because I'd met Xavier in Yosemite, and he was into soloing. So he knew I had some wall experience, and he came up to me and he goes, "John, what's the hardest wall on El Cap?" And I said, "Well, what's the hardest wall that hasn't been soloed?" "Well, Sea of Dreams hasn't been soloed." So he went and fired off the first descent of that. Then the next year he came back from Switzerland and he said, "Now I need another hard one." Jolly Roger would be impressive solo, and so he solos that. And then and then the third year he goes, "What's next?" And I think
you're done. You're out. You've run out of hard routes.
No, I said Sheep Ranch. So,
Sheep Ranch.
So he started soloing the Sheep Ranch, and about 5 pitches up, he's like, "John, I'm so tired of soloing." And this was in 1989, right?
I know the feeling.
Yeah. And I actually had come back to the Yosemite in 1989, and I really wasn't expecting to climb walls. I was now making gear and just coming back to free climb and maybe do nose in a day kind of things. And then Walt Shipley had been working on a new route on Half Dome, and he was getting burned out. And so we actually did the first ascent of the Kali Yuga on Half Dome. And this was the first wall I'd done for 4 years. And I was on the same wall,
Half Dome. The rescue happened.
Yeah, but we were on the south face when the rescue happened, but now I'm on the north face, which is even more, shadowy and cold and more exposed in storms. And of course, you don't have those slabs ahead of you, which caused a lot of problems. But yeah, so we did that in 7 days, and then I got down from that, and Xavier was like, "Let's go climbing," So we ended up doing the third ascent of the Sheep Ranch together. And we climbed a new variation through the Cyclops Eye roof, which was quite wild. And that was a great, bonding. We just were a really good team. Mm-hmm. Well, the next year, or a couple of years later, he was organizing a trip to Great Triangle Tower, and he had 4 Swiss climbers. There was a team of 4 that were going to Great Triangle Tower. And one of the team members actually broke his leg right before the trip, and Xavier said, "Hey, do you want to come?" This was 3 or 4 months before the trip. He said, "Do you want to come on our trip?" And I was just like, "Yeah, of course. This sounds great." So he had it all organized. They had the permit. And so we went over there as a team of 4. And of course, Xavier knew we climbed well together. And I would say we were a good team. He was definitely a bolder climber, but I think I had a bit more experience in the engineering aspect, like the mapping of the route and deciding where to go and how we're going to strategize with the amount of gear and how we're going to.
I mean, it sounds like a perfect team.
Yeah,
then
we were really perfect. Yeah. I mean, we were just always synced up and just laughing all the time.
He was famous for being a bit crazy. And I'll say this because people don't know this. We are using the past tense because Xavier's no longer with us.
No, he died.
Xavier.
Base jumping.
Yeah, base jumping accident. Early base jumper. So,
yeah.
Which is terrible, but I just wanted to clarify that not long. When
I think 94 is when in the Staubach
Yeah, I remember even because again I'm now really into wall climbing and remember just like how shocking and he was just flamboyant and always like crazy clothes and glasses and obviously even on that tower. I mean, you guys look like you were just kind of having a good time up there. So.
Oh, he loved to have fun.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the climb. I just wanted to clarify that.
So when we got there, we were a team of 4, as I mentioned, but the 2 other Swiss climbers realized this route we were picking out on the Great Triangle was a bit more than they wanted to do. So they went off and worked on a route on Triangle Tower, formerly called Nameless. And Xavier and I basically made the plans to do this route. And we spent a couple weeks just prepping it, just getting all our gear up to the base. Just getting up to the base was quite a challenging. It's a very dangerous gully you have to climb up, and you can only climb it at night, of course, because it was avalanching during the day, all day. I mean, it was just really one pitch at a time. There was a moment there where we had fixed a rope and we were blasting. Xavier was actually at the top of the first pitch, and I was coming up the rope. I was, going to be leading the second pitch, and these 2 blocks the size of school buses came off right at that moment, right above us, off this huge eyebrow flake. And they came down, and they were coming down from about 3,000 feet above us. And so, of course, that's about 8 to 10 seconds of time. And they're just sort of, and when you look up at a rock coming down, if it doesn't seem like it's moving left or right, it's coming down for you. And this thing just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it was sort of slowly twisting. And we basically thought we were goners. We were just like, this is it. It was so terrifying. And we just huddled as close as we could. Xavier said in his article about it, we made ourselves small underneath our helmets. Right. And
like a helmet would have helped.
But because, exactly, yeah. But because this wall overhung so much, the first 2,000 feet, these things fell about 30 or 40 feet behind us, directly in line with us, though. And they hit the glacier, and there was this huge 2-minute mini snowstorm blizzard from the rocks hitting the glacier. And there was a moment there where we looked at each other and we're like, are we really going to do this? And I just started coming up, let's not think about that. And we kept going. And we spent 15 days on that climbing up to the summit. And then 3 days descending. Right.
And that was like, I think I remember, again, following that or knowing about it. You didn't follow it because it wasn't internet days. You just read about it months later in the magazines. But that was kind of the real like advanced use of the capsule style.
Exactly, yeah.
This idea of moving a base camp, fixing ropes.
Yeah.
And you guys were like inventing a lot of things on this because here you are being able to walk to the base El Cap in 3 minutes, however long well, with a haul bag, it takes a little longer. And then, half dub's a little bit of a push, but, this idea of before you even get to the wall, you've got to do all this mountaineering.
Exactly, yeah.
With all this heavy equipment.
Yeah, probably TD plus, in the European grade, the ice climb, because Ace Cavelli came up and he said it was one of the hardest alpine climbs he'd ever done just to get to the base.
Right. So you're, this is all kind of, again, this new world. And, we were talking about that Chenard quote about, going into the Great Ranges. It's like, finally, it's happening in a sense. Well, at least with big wall climbing.
Yeah, I don't think we pioneered it. I mean, of course, Porter had climbed Asgard and, there was definitely amazing. And of course, Trango had been climbed in that window because Pakistan had been closed for all those years in the 80s, of course. But, the Joe Brown and Poison Ascent of Nameless Tower. That was. I mean, those were
sure. I mean, everything's built on the shoulders of what's coming before.
But the reason, the capsule style, I don't know if I like that term because it's not the same as the capsule style they use in the mountains. I call it big wall alpine style. But we had 4 ropes or 5 ropes, I guess. One of the ropes was 300 feet. But the reason you have to have that technique is because there's not everywhere you can bivvy safely. Mm-hmm. Greg Child actually had sent me a photo of that face on Great Trango, and you just see the whole face avalanching. Sure. And he basically said, "There's no way that face will get climbed." Now I had forgotten that he had sent me that photo. He reminded me afterwards that he showed me this photo before I went. I'm glad I forgot about it because there's a lot of places on that wall where you couldn't camp. Right. It's just too much exposure to basically icefall and rockfall coming down from the cornice on top. That's why we needed the ability to fix 2 or 3 pitches ahead. But we never had fixed ropes to the ground. Once we were 4 pitches up, we were basically committed because that whole first half is overhanging and it would be horrendous. In fact, we did rappel it, but the only way to get back down was we had to strategically leave pieces of parachute cord to connect sections so we could pull ourselves back in to get down, and so that was my job to keep those logistics alive.
So wait, I don't get it.
So on the way up, sometimes we'd be going over such a steep overhanging section and we knew we were going to possibly rappelling down the route, so I would leave a piece of parachute cord from the inside of the overhang to the outside, so when we were wrapping down, there's no way we could have swung to the belay under the roof. So I was able to pull myself back in with a piece of parachute cord. But the whole idea is, that was a safe place to bivvy under a roof, of course, but the next pitch wasn't. So we had to be able to have the ability to fix a few pitches above each safe camp.
And were you able to conceive of all this or most of it on the ground? In terms of your experience, or was like the parachute cord thing something you improvised up there?
Oh, improvising, yeah. I mean, that's the whole game. That's the whole game of wall climbing is, it's about like figuring things out on the spot. Mm-hmm. But I would say, I'd done the Atlantic Ocean wall. I'd done a few new routes, and the whole idea, like we didn't have a telescope in Pakistan, but we had good binoculars. And so, we spent a few weeks. I mean, I spent a few weeks going out there in different light, maybe in the evening, looking at it from one angle, and then in the morning from another angle, and just finding the features up there. So that's where my skill actually helped our process, was just being able to map the route. Because, of course, when you're up there might be a good crack around the buttress, but you can't see it. So you have to refer to your map and go, oh, look, if we pendulum over this buttress, we're going to get to another crack system. Mm-hmm. So, I would say we didn't go exactly where I thought we were going to go, but pretty close.
Pretty close, yeah.
And we found some unexpected dangers, too, like the Gollum's Gully, which was avalanching massively every day, and got hit pretty hard there. And we thought we had to retreat. This is about halfway up. But then we just climbed that section over 2 nights and fixed those ropes through it as quick as we could.
So you're climbing, it's not just like a beautiful, smooth, nice El Cap style wall. You're going over big snowy ledges up through, gullies to get between the sort of sweet, nice, steep, good nailing kind of stuff.
Well, there's only one ledge on that whole wall. Really, it's the snowy ledge like halfway up. And that was a luxury, really, being able to stand. Because there was nowhere else on that wall where there was ever really a ledge. Right. Like you find on Camp 6 or on El Cap. There's never a place where we could just stand and organize gear. The whole thing was... but that snowy ledge was really quite a nice...
Has that been ever climbed again, or that wall climbed again?
I don't think so. Yeah. I know a lot of teams have gone over there with the intention of doing a second ascent. But frankly, I mean, when you get over there, there's lots of potential for new routes.
Do a new route, yeah.
So maybe someday, but...
I want to also talk about you sort of moving on from wall climbing. But before we get there, we keep going back to this engineering theme because I think that's like a big part of your legacy in the sport is the fact that you were not just a climber, you were creating the gear that you needed to climb. But and also engineering, I watched it to a certain extent. Again, learning the old guys' standards, and then I actually climbed through this same era where you were literally producing equipment each year that was making it.
Yeah, I love that
durable.
era. That was actually quite a fun time because I was probably tapering off in the 90s, but like you guys were just, I was so excited to see climbing, the big wall climbing sort of become interesting again for the community.
And the engineering is such a big part of the A climbing, and it makes it's kind of this weird thing where in a way it makes it, the word I come to is easier, but it's also, that's not quite correct because all it does is it sort of let you get out there further.
Exactly.
Where for you, and what do you think it was about the mind part of it? And we joked earlier about the aid rant, which I'm very famous for, which was, a lot of people still to this day don't get that it was tongue in cheek.
Okay.
I was drunk for sure, and it was just one of those things. But what part of your brain, we've talked about your engineering brain, what part of your brain was that useful, and was it something you cultivated to be able to be out there bouncing up and down on a hook?
I guess there's two ways to respond to that. One is like, I guess as an engineer, I like to see flow, and of course the best tools are transparent. You don't even know you have them because they're just doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, I guess the engineering. I guess I was just always interested in the puzzle of it. Really, it's a puzzle. It's this mystery. When I started wall climbing, after this Yosemite thing, the experienced wall climbers of the valley, they didn't really want to climb with a beginner. And so for me, it was just this mystery of like, how are they doing that? How is that happening? And it was, I guess there was a bit of elitism in the Camp 4 scene, but because I never really felt like I could go up and approach the rescue team back in the 70s. But to me, it was just this puzzle, I guess you could say. Like, how can you do this, really? And I guess once I figured it out, I'd like to share it. So it was really about sharing the techniques with those articles. But really, I guess this goes back to the Chenard quote of, in 1963, he wrote about how Yosemite was the training ground for the super alpinists of the future to go out and climb in these remote ranges of the world. And that was always my mantra. Like everything I was doing in the valley was just training for something future. And I was just so fortunate to have this opportunity to go with Xavier because, I'm not sure if I was pretty busy with A5 at the time. And to me, I was like, now my role was to help other people do it, I guess you could say, in the 90s. And I was sort of tapering off. But then I was able to truly test all these theories that, okay, we got the techniques, we've got the tools, and now we're going to put it to the test, I guess.
Right.
So I'm trying to think how to answer your question.
To be honest with you, there may not be an answer because I've been asked the same thing.
Yeah.
And, I kind of have this memory or this idea that somehow it was almost like a drone camera, like an out-of-body thing where, in all honesty, it was like, well, I'm up here, but, it's not really me. Or I'm a machine that's doing this thing, back to this engineering thing where I've got all these techniques refined, and if I can just do the techniques in a machine-like way, they're going to get me up this thing. So I'm going to bounce test, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to, everything's just right.
The methodical aspect, yeah.
And if I can stay a computer brain, then, and I think, in a lot of ways, talking to Alex Honnold the same way, like computer brain tells me that I'm capable of this. So let's keep this ocean of emotions like nice and placid down inside there. And I don't know why I could do it. And my joke now, and we'll talk a little bit about the aid rant, my joke now is that despite my, bravado with that thing, if you took me, 46-year-old Chris, and just suddenly popped me into the middle of like
Sea of Dreams.
Yeah, or I think the last really hard wall I did was Gulfstream, and which is part of your route, Atlantic, or
gnarly route. Yeah.
And so if you projected me into the middle of one of the hardest pitches on that, I'd lose my mind. Like I would lose my mind. I would probably go catatonic. because whatever I'd had then is gone with age or with knowledge or with whatever else. But it was there, this ability to just be up there, just like,
keep it together.
Yeah. But it's a very difficult and mysterious thing to delve into as to why I was able to do it. Because I wasn't like a brooding wall rat kind of dude when I was on the ground. So I don't know where it came from.
Well, I think climbing's changed a bit, and one of the things that I think we were really doing a little bit differently in the 80s was, when you think of like the kind of crazy things like Walt Shipley was doing, I mean, I think, for us, the challenge was to get as out there as possible and see if we could survive, really. So we were actually soloing at just like a letter grade below our limit sometimes, and sometimes, in different situations. But, I think now climbing is much more controlled and more practiced and more, people realize like it's more of it's more of a performance art now, in a good way though, I mean, really the ability to perfect like difficult moves is really quite inspiring. But I think back then we considered any sort of practice as a bit, well, that's not really helping us for that time when we're so out there and our mind's going crazy and we have to keep it together. Like you're on that broken hold and you're about to fall and the only thing you can do is lunge up to the next hold and latch it, and that if you don't make it, you're going to like take it, bone-breaking fall, and you just do it. So we were always looking for those situations where we're kind of pushing. We wanted to find where the edge was, I guess you could say. And of course, a lot of that group has not survived.
Right.
Derek Hersey and Walt Shipley, and you can only get away with that. Like going to the very edge and seeing if you can survive so many times before the percentages catch up to you, I think. And that's really what I realized when I was about 33 is I said, well, I'm seeing all my friends get killed. And really what's happening, I think, is, you peak out about 33, 34 for this kind of thing, in terms of endurance and strength and reflexes. And I think, a lot of the deaths were caused by just the mind being willing to do it, but necessarily the physical ability just being 99%, and that 1% just, causes tragedy, really.
So you said on the way here that 93, 94 after the Triangle Tower, really good years. And then was there a tapering off, and was that in your mind of like, wow, I've gotten away with a lot?
Exactly. Yeah. When Xavier got killed, actually, that was really quite a pivotal moment for me because he and I had been training. I was actually getting into base jumping, and I was doing a lot of skydiving. And our plan was to go to Baffin and do the first time a wall would be climbed with the parachutes in the haul bag, climb up and use it as the descent vehicle. So we were, he was ahead of the game, but I was catching up in terms of learning how to base jump, and that was our plan. We were going to go the next year to Baffin and climb one of the big walls there in the Sam Ford Fjord.
I remember that. I remember that you were Will Ox, was that?
Yeah, Will Ox was my mentor.
Sure. Yeah. All these wall climbers were suddenly thinking about base jumping.
Yeah. This is of course before there's custom base chutes. Of course, you just use modified or regular skydiving chutes with a reserve even. And I remember Will Ox took me under his wing, and we convinced Darren Cope and Zion to take us up in his airplane. He'd just been getting his private license, and we jumped out of his plane. this is before I had a license or anything to jump. But so I was catching up and going some bridges and things like that. And then Xavier got killed in Staubach, and that just shut me down really. I just, I sold my parachute, and I basically just realized like I didn't want to do that to the people around me, like my family really, because I think at that point I really just felt like if I died, that's my decision, I realized like after all my friends died that it really wasn't just that, it was really big impact on the community around you. And I think I felt that I just needed to taper down. I wanted to survive.
Right.
And live long. And so I basically kind of quit,
right.
Serious climbing, extreme climbing, where I was putting my life on the line, probably around 95, 96.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't have a terrible tragedy like that happen to me necessarily, but I felt the same way. For all the joking again about like, oh, A5 doesn't exist, it's all not that hard, which is in the aid rant. I mean, I was the same way. Like, I've gotten away with this, and I didn't go nearly as far as you did in terms of climbing.
Well,
but climbing hard routes on El Cap, and I'm getting away with something here, and maybe. Where do you go? Like once you climb stuff like Gulfstream and the Reticent Wall and these other routes, like you go to the Great Ranges. So was I willing to make that step? And whether I'm lazy or what, I was like, no, I think we're good. I'll do this and again stay climbing. But why don't I go and try to do some fun climbing where I'm not gripped all the time, or whatever,
and
that would be interesting.
and just talk, like obviously wall climbing's become really solid in the public eye, now with Tommy Caldwell's amazing ascent of the New Dawn. And, to me, like the most amazing thing about what Tommy was doing up on that New Dawn was not necessarily the technical free climbing, but the ability that he was being able to maneuver on this massive wall and find that line of free climbing. And that skill, that's the next skill, the ability to move efficiently and fast and using because it's quite challenging, as you know, on a wall to maneuver. If you got 2 hull bags and you're in a place, you can't get over just 10 feet over very easily. And so, really what he was doing up there was just this amazing maneuverability. And that skill, I think, is going to be the next generation, for the alpinists.
Well,
big wall alpinists.
And you built so much of it, literally. Mm-hmm. Literally building equipment. And it's again like my premise, and we talked about this earlier. Well, actually, and back to the aid rant, and if anybody hasn't seen it, I find it hard to believe because I think a lot of people know me from that before this thing came. But it's a video where I spray for 10 minutes in Kochimo with a piscola in my hand about how easy A climbing is. A5 doesn't exist because somebody has to die. But the truth is that I did get this feeling, and it's kind of because of you in a way, is that we had refined it, and you had refined it in a lot of ways, because at the height of mid 90s, 95, 96, like. To this engineering science, and it had gotten to where people were climbing the hardest routes on El Cap, these former like fearsome routes, no problem. It was kind of like 514 now.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden everybody seems like they climb 514 or these young people. And it was the same way of like these things were just getting knocked down again and again. And I think it was because like it had reached this like this utter refinement of how to do it. The gear, again, partially thanks to you, it just felt all of a sudden like, wow, is this really like that hard, or are we just pretending it is anymore? Because stuff was just getting knocked. You were there. It was like an ascent of Sea of Dreams was like not even noteworthy anymore.
Yeah, but I think it's just like you said. I mean, if you or I were put on the crux pitch of the Gulfstream right now, we would be completely out of our limit. But of course, you're building up to it. You got your first pitch, and you're climbing one piece at a time, and you merge into that state of almost a Zen state of being able to technically ascend. In terms of aid climbing, but. I think it's just builds. Everything builds on your previous psyche, and just being able to get yourself. It's sort of the Alice in Wonderland. You're going through the tunnel, and you get there, and you're just there doing it. And I think the tools and the techniques help, but I mean, it's really the individual who's being able to like put themselves in that kind of situation where fear needs to be understood and controlled, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and when that like,
and that's why just to respond to your aid rant,
right? Yeah,
I love that aid rant. It was so funny when I first saw it, and I've watched it many times, and but I guess my somber response would be, well, yeah, exactly that. Nobody's climbing A5 without the prerequisite. If you were just thrown on an A5, you would probably die. But you build, and it's sort of like, I guess, the big waves. No beginner surfer is even going to be able to get out in the ocean to do a big wave surf. Because they're just going to get munched on the rip going out. But so the people who are truly climbing, like A4 plus and A5, the only reason they get there is because they've already overcome a lot of other challenges.
Well, yeah, and I see that in all climbing because, like the Black Canyon, ding. Mm-hmm. I say it all the time. That's right. There's fearsome hard routes there, 512s that are scary,
exactly,
511s that are super scary. Yeah. But really, the accidents all happen on the easier routes down there. Yeah. Because once you get to where you're climbing, those levels, you're able to not fall. So, you'd think the 511 plus RX pitches would be wiping people out, but they almost literally never do. And the rescues and everything are happening on Journey Home, which is 5.9 so again, like I realized all this. And the fact is that when that blew up and it was all of a sudden, it was early internet. Like I was like, people hate me all of a sudden. My only embarrassment I had from it was honestly like thinking of people like yourself, because I have like utmost respect for what you did for wall climbing, what you did as a wall climber, and I couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you.
Because you were like 2 years before was your height in Yosemite, and I walked in and we were all standing, on your equipment and using it. So there was some embarrassment in my mind of like, well, God, I hope these guys realize that like I'm totally shitting and like I took that stuff seriously and like have the utmost respect for it. So I'm glad we're able to talk, because my embarrassment of a handful of people out there going like, God, what a little shit, like.
No, for me, I just love it whenever whenever the discussion is talking about, that kind of technique. So for me, it was like, hey, you're raising a good question.
Well, and also you knew that this was a common debate even in those days of sitting in the meadow of what A4 meant. Because we all didn't really know, and that was kind of part of it too. Like you didn't know like what it really meant, like just it meant to hit a ledge, and another person said no, it meant this, and so it was this really weird amorphous grading system anyway that I'd been forced to explain to people over and over again. So that's kind of where the whole like spiel had come from.
I see.
Anyhow, but we're about out of time. But I want to ask you the last thing is about you're here in the States, and I internet stalked you. I saw an Instagram post that you were here. And people had requested to have you on, and I was like, no, he lives in Australia, like forget it. But so I jumped on the opportunity, and I really appreciate it. But you are here because you have made a few porta-ledges, like you're back in the game.
Well, yeah, I have a new porta-ledge design. It's called the D4 porta-ledge. And basically it all started, I take we go to Arapalis every year in Australia. And my boy and I have been doing some multi-pitch climbs, 5-7.
Oh, lucky you, man. That's
so fun.
So great.
It's the dream, actually. Yeah. If I could just do one more climb, I'd want to climb, a 3-pitch route with my boy, so fun. And anyway, there was a climber there, Chris Trull, and he just approached me, and he knew about my climbing because in Australia I'm pretty anonymous, which I like, and so he started telling me about like, we need some lightweight tools, porta-ledge. We need some porta-ledges like you used to make. And so I started working on designs. And the first thing I did was just re-engineered the frame for a bigger ledge, because I realized people wanted a bigger ledge. And so I re-engineered the frame, and I call it the hybrid diameter. It's just a simple, really change, but I used some CAD tools that I'd learned at University of New South Wales to sort of re-engineer the frame. And then I came up with this idea of the curved corners, which add rigidity to the frame. And so that was another step. And at this time, I was just sort of throwing the ideas out there on Super Topo, and maybe with the hopes that somebody would make it. And then I realized, okay, I got to do this. I got to just make this next generation porta-ledge. And so I started a Kickstarter in March, I think, and we pre-sold 36 porta-ledges, D4, and now we're in the process of building them. And basically every summer, part of my agreement with my wife is that we come back to America every summer to visit our families. And so during this trip, it just so happened that I got back in touch with my old A5 cohort, Barry Ward, and he was just setting up a sewing shop in Durango. And so he and I started just making a few prototypes at first. And I think in the last, it's really been a great process the last 3 or 4 months, really, because we've really improved so many things that were just nagging little aspects of being able to deploy the ledge quickly, to be able to have a very sheltered fly, but also be able to open it up between storms to dry things out. These things that are actually really critical for survival if you're going to go for the next step. And the main thing is that we've really reduced the weight for a full-size porta-ledge. We've shaved off 10 pounds off the current Cliff Cabana, which is my old A5 design that's been modified and added a few things added to it. And that weighs 30 pounds now. And so we've basically almost half the weight of that, and also a small pack size. Because when you're thinking about approaching these big climbs out in the remote mountains, you need to have something that's compact so you're not off balance.
Yeah, totally. Like when you're carrying a haul bag, there was always that frickin' ledge sticking up and grabbing trees and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. So having something compact, basically it's back to that idea of creating something that's just an invisible tool. And so I think we've really done it. I think we've actually produced this next paradigm in porta-ledges, which I hope will help climbers look more to those remote mountains, because now they have a lightweight tool that they can survive anything. And I remember seeing, one of those film festivals that travels around climbing shows, and there was a hilarious film. I can't remember if they're Norwegian or Scandinavian climbers, and they're in Baffin Island. It was a hilarious film, and they're looking up at this wall in Baffin Island. And they had one of the giant porta-ledges of that are being made today, and they're looking up this wall. We want to climb this, but we don't want to take this big giant thing. They throw it down, and then of course in the next scene, they're sitting shivering on some ledge in the twilight of the Baffin Island night, and I realized, these guys have never even seen what a lightweight tool is. Right. They think that a porta-ledge is just this giant, big, heavy thing. And so that helped inspire me, too. And then, of course, I met Mark Reganovitz in Yosemite last fall. And, he's sort of the epitome of what I wanted to design gear again for, because he's out there soloing new routes in Baffin Island and remote places, and he needs a lightweight tool. Right. So there was enough inspiration to get back into it, I guess. And so, yeah, I'm pretty proud of this new design, the D4 porta-ledge. And, I don't know what we're going to do after we fulfill all the Kickstarter orders, but hopefully, the design will keep getting made, because I do feel like it will help climbers achieve new dreams. It
occurred to me that it took you, someone like you, to have the knowledge of these little things that are deficient over the years. You see, and basically your original designs that have now, they're like the Rockcraft they're 30 years old.
Exactly.
And so, but the other thing I realized is that it's such a small market, and I was going to ask you about that when you talked about starting A5, of building these hammers basically for your friends.
Yeah.
Not a multi-million-dollar gonna get rich and sell tens of thousands of these things, where a company with the resources of the North Face, Black Diamond, Metolius, whoever. It's like a hard sell to be let's make 30 porta-ledges. And so it takes some small people with a passion project who, they want to see these things exist. And if they pay for themselves or, some make a little money, great. But it's just the market is not there, I don't think, for a bigger company to do something like that.
They're small volume and low margin.
Yeah, super low.
Sometimes
there's a lot that goes into making one.
Exactly. Yeah, we've really done a lot of work we might break even with a Kickstarter, probably not. But to me, it's worth it as the investment for the climbing community, really, just to produce something that allows that next generation, really.
So where does this? I mean, no one can order one right now.
Well,
they just can beg you to.
You can pre-order, I guess, but yeah, basically it's going to be up to Barry because I live in Tasmania, and basically buying tubing there is like 4 times the cost.
Sure.
And I have a sewing machine over there, and I can sew. But then to ship it is $200. So it's just not really living in Tasmania isn't really a great place to try to run a business, especially in the markets mostly in Europe and America. But hopefully Barry will continue to produce them.
Is there any way for people to bug D4 right now? Get in touch with you
Yeah,
guys?
there is a way. I have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/bigwallgear, all one word, and I post all the updates, and I've really been transparent with this design. Actually, I've just like put it all out there. Like, here's how I engineered it. Here's all the secrets, and for me, innovation. I understand people are going to probably copy it. I hope they, do in a way because it's definitely a better product for climbers. But at the same time, if we wanted to keep the brand going, my philosophy is just keep out innovating. The competition, because you're always going to, the original innovators will, even though they might not get the market distribution because of the network, but you'll still always be pushing the boundary of like what's the best. So yeah, I still plan to be involved with that. I actually have some new products too because my interest has always been folding systems. So after I finished my climbing business,
you're an origami guy.
Well, kind of, yeah, but more structural folding, and but origami is interesting, and mathematically, of course, and but yeah, so I got into fabric architecture. That was what I did after I got into climbing, and I still have dreams of like producing like some large scale fabric architecture, structural, with fabric, and but of course that's a lot of there needs to be more funding for that kind of project. But so right now I'm actually working on some tent designs and just folding systems that will allow quicker deploy of systems that you might need in the outdoors.
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody out there is a wall climber, and even with your original ledges, like we've all been in the middle of the night banging something together, just like waiting for the rain or in the rain or whatever. Like maybe the most frustrating moments on a big wall is when you can't get your goddamn porta-ledge together.
Yeah.
So you're like thinking through these things that
still takes practice. The D4, you still want to practice it. It's not a completely self-assembling ledge, but it is a lot easier than the old ones. And as I say, these new ideas I'm working on actually are quicker deploys.
All right.
But, yeah.
Well, cool. Hopefully people will get in touch with you. And thanks a lot for sitting down. Is there anything we missed?
Oh, well, I don't know.
There's a lot we missed. We didn't even talk about Zion.
I love that place.
You had a whole wall career post Yosemite and Zion because you were based out of Hurricane.
Yeah.
And anyway, so much more to talk about, but we've killed over an hour. So.
Yeah. But well, thank you so much, Chris. It's really an honor to be able to speak to you, and thank you. I love your Enormocast, and it's so fun to listen to what's happening in the climbing world these days.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And again, had so much respect for you when I was a wall climber, and it continues to this day. So I appreciate you sitting down.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to John for sitting down. Glad I caught him while he was here in the States. It was a real pleasure. Bit of a hero to me back in the day, and it was great to sit down and talk to him. Also, somebody that's so psyched about climbing and about design that he's going to throw his weight towards a new porta-ledge, which is, not necessarily a scheme to get you that retirement cottage in the Hamptons or anything like that. Definitely just a passion project, wants to produce something and see it used and maybe push things forward a little bit. So you can check out the porta-ledge, the D4, at Big Wall Gear on Facebook, the Big Wall Gear page, or bigwallgear.com also has information about the D4, whether you can still get one, what's going to happen with that. Kind of up in the air, I think. I think they've fulfilled their Kickstarter orders and are going from there. So if you're interested in one of these ledges, go check out the D4 porta-ledge. Just Google it. It's right there. Oh, and if you're an investor, you have some money lying around you want to throw towards mass producing the D4, I'm sure they would love to hear from you. All right, once again, happy birthday to the Enormocast. And happy holidays to you guys. Stay safe out there this holiday season. Lots of bad travel conditions, lots of drinking, lots of mania out there during this season. So take care of each other, look out for each other. And if you're out there climbing, whether it's ice or rock or just going to the gym to shake off all that sugar you've been pounding and maybe clear your head from too much family conversation, just remember, rock, ice, or plastic, you better check your knot.